What is up, YouTube? This is T Quentin1 coming at you with another video. And today I'm going to talk to you about a franchise that I've always been a huge fan of, the X-Men movies. I figured I didn't have time to review them individually, so today I'm just going to rank them from worst to best. Now, this isn't sorted by Tomato Meter or IMDb or any of that shit, just my opinion. Also, at least, when I start getting into some of the best movies, there's going to be some spoilers out the ass. So, with that out of the way, let's start with the worst X-Men film there is, bottom of the list, number 10, X-Men Origins Wolverine. This movie just plain sucks. I can name something I like with all the other X-Men movies, but here, good God, the story is bad, the effects are bad, the characters are bad, the acting is bad. It's just one big tidal wave of bad. On top of that, it buries what could have been so interesting in nonsensical action scenes and unqueer motivations. There really aren't any cool mutants in this one either. That sure as hell ain't Deadpool, and this is the only time I will ever say Hugh Jackman phoned it in as Wolverine. Just fuck this movie. Number 9, X-Men The Last Stand. Not far off is Brett Ratner's abysmal conclusion to what should have been a pretty bulletproof trilogy, The Last Stand. It lacks both the brains and heart of the first two X-Men movies and doesn't offer anything competent as a replacement. Remember, this was supposed to be the conclusion of these films. It's Return of the Jedi or Dark Knight Rises, but no one is given a satisfying ending. In fact, the other films just ignore it anyway. It killed off Professor X. Nobody acknowledged that in the other movies. Same goes for Magneto losing his powers. The Last Stand is what happens when you give a bad script to a bad director. Plain and simple. Number 8, X-Men Apocalypse. Alternatively, X-Men Apocalypse is what happens when you give a bad script to a good director, or at least a better director than Brett Ratner. This movie seemed less concerned with clever writing and interesting characters and more concerned about delivering crazy CGI action scenes. Sadly, the CGI is actually pretty bad. I also feel like the performances in this one just lacked the punch they had in Bryan Singer's other X-Men films, especially Jennifer Lawrence, who looks like she'd rather be anywhere else. Though there are some positives, especially Quicksilver's pretty awesome in this movie. And Apocalypse is not horrible, but it did not live up to what it should have been, in my opinion. Number 7, The Wolverine. Undoubtedly an improvement over X-Men Origins, but still has one big flaw. The last third. While the first two-thirds of this film executed the human element quite well, all of that goes to waste in what the director James Mangold himself called one big CG fuckathon. The stuff about Wolverine dealing with killing Jean Grey and the idea that he's lived so long all he wants to do is just die, good stuff. Fighting a big robot samurai and a girl that can shoot acid from her mouth, kind of stupid. It did pave the way for a much better film from director James Mangold, and that bullet train fight was pretty rad. But the whole movie was still kind of a mixed bag for me. Number 6, Deadpool. Most of you are probably surprised that this isn't higher on the list, but I had some trouble getting into it, to be honest. Was it funny? Yeah, and in a comedy, that's really all I'm worried about. But people were acting like this was one of the best comic book movies of all time, and for me, it's not even close. Ryan Reynolds is really funny, and his rapid fire delivery does help the film greatly, but the low budget is obvious, and some of the vulgarity just didn't work for me. And I'm a South Park fan. I was old enough to see it, so maybe I was too old to fully appreciate it, but it does have its moments. Ryan Reynolds is hilarious, as I said, and the superhero genre needed a good satirical look at it, although it has been done better in my opinion. Number 5, X-Men, the film that started it all and basically gave us the modern comic book movie. When movies like Tank Girl and Batman and Robin were everywhere, Bryan Singer's first X-Men film came out of nowhere, and it still holds up pretty damn well in my opinion, with a compelling story, interesting layered characters, and a tone that really fits this universe. Much like the first Richard Donner Superman film, X-Men played it straight. The movie opens in Auschwitz, for God's sakes. Another thing this film nailed was casting. Patrick Stewart as Charles Xavier, Ian McKellen as Magneto. But it doesn't stop there. This whole cast is fantastic. Anna Paquin is so good as Rogue, and of course, Hugh Jackman is maybe the best casting choice of all time. It's also tightly written with pretty good dialogue and interesting plot. While the soundtrack is kind of meh and the effects haven't aged as gracefully as the other elements, I still think it holds up rather well. Number 4, X-Men First Class. Matthew Vaughn breathed new life into what was essentially a dead franchise with First Class. After the 1-2 punch of X-Men Origins and The Last Stand, nobody expected much of this prequel, but with emphasis on being faithful to the first two movies and casting that rivals Bryan Singer's films, It blew away everyone's expectation, delivered a film that not only had a great, tightly written story, but also a sense of fun that these movies rarely have. Kevin Bacon was also hilarious as the villain, and as I said, the main cast is great, rivaling Bryan Singer, with James McAvoy being fantastic as young Charles Xavier, and same goes for Michael Fassbender as young Magneto. I also liked that it really got lost in the 60s. I appreciated that. And again, this was just really fun. Number 3, Days of Future Past. Like The Force Awakens, Days of Future Past balances old and new elements perfectly. It bridged the gap between the first two movies and First Class, bringing the cast of characters together, and it was great to see all the original X-Men again. And the scene where James McAvoy and Patrick Stewart talk to each other, Charles to Charles, was amazing. The action scenes were also the best they had ever been. The movie introduced fan favorite character Quicksilver as well, and the time in a bottle scene is just genius. Like First Class, it puts a lot of emphasis on time period, with the Vietnam War being an especially fascinating setting for the X-Men. Some criticized the story, but I felt it was relatively straightforward and well thought out. Also, Jennifer Lawrence actually doesn't look bored out of her mind in this one. First Class may have woke the franchise up, but Days of Future Past vaulted it back to the top. Number 2, Logan. It's a western starring Wolverine. What more do you need? Well, how about an emotional story and a fitting goodbye to the characters of Wolverine and Charles Xavier? For me, this is where I get off. I love this franchise, but they will never have a better conclusion than this, no matter what comes next. All the X-Men are dead in this movie anyway, so why bother? This is basically the exact opposite of X-Men Apocalypse, going for a smaller, more contained, and brutally violent movie. The themes it deals with are mature and fitting for a final chapter in this saga. Also, the performances are great all around, with Hugh Jackman just giving it all he has. James Mangold directed this film masterfully, with the cinematography being the best out of any of the X-Men films, and that ending, just perfect. And number 1, X-Men 2. Yeah, this one is still my favorite. Now, Logan is a pretty close second, but you can't top X-Men 2. It juggles all the characters super well, and I love the dark tone. It has maybe the most tightly written story I've seen in a comic book movie, with no scene seeming unnecessary. Everything has a point. There was a quote from Trey Parker a while ago that talked about the difference between good and bad storytelling, where good storytelling is this happens, and because that happens, this happens, and so on and so forth. There's a cause and effect to everything, and bad storytelling is just random events. This definitely falls into the former category, as I said, with every scene having a point. X-Men 2 also developed the main character in the first film a lot, the returning cast doing a great job. Anna Paquin was awesome, Patrick Stewart, Ian McKellen, and of course, Hugh Jackman is the best. But it also introduced some great new characters. I love Brian Cox as the villain Stryker, and Alan Cumming was awesome as my personal favorite X-Men, Nightcrawler. X-Men 2 is a great film, and a little bit underrated, but I've always fucking loved this movie. I think it's an awesome 10 out of 10 film, and it's the best of the series in my opinion. So that was my list. If you disagree or agree, whatever, comment below, let me know. Stequint1 signing out.